This is the Open University.
Well, the wrong guy won the South Korean election, Putin invaded the Ukraine, and COVID rates are at an all-time high in Europe. But not everything is lost, because there's a new Momus album called Smudger out this month. And Momus himself is in Paris enjoying, slightly guiltily in the state of the world in the context, but enjoying the Parisian bohemian bourgeois existence. There's Cot Cafe, for instance. This is a kind of a snapshot Open University in which I just show the things that are exciting me here in Paris with my girlfriend Noemi, the cafes, the upcycling second-hand clothes shops, the art centers and exhibitions. And it's actually interesting because one of the things the Ukraine has done to counteract the Russian invasion is they released a video of Paris being attacked, for Parisian landmarks exploding under Russian missiles, and said, if this was another European city like Paris, the world would be up in arms. The world is up in arms, or is up in sanctions at the very least. But it's funny that Paris is considered the sort of jewel in Europe's diadem, the jewel in the crown, the most outrageous place to attack. It's true that it is a cultural treasure house, and the kind of way that we personally experience it is, I guess, what David Brooks used to call Bobo. Bobo is bourgeois-bohemian. It's funny because when I was like 5 years old, my best friend was called Bobo, who was the son of the minister in Edinburgh. But Bobo, according to David Brooks, he's sort of a conservative who writes for the New York Times. He wrote this book called Bobos in Paradise, which came out in about 2000. 2000 was like the high water mark of the 90s bourgeois-bohemian experience, in which we all had faith in the future and believed in color and optimism. And it was a kind of recapitulation of the 60s optimism. In the West, anyway. I think this doesn't apply in places like China or South Korea, which are just experiencing the crest of their particular waves right now. But in terms of optimism and in terms of people swinging, as we used to say, or being permissive back in the 60s, in terms of a bohemian ideal of color, sex, vibrancy, delight, art, and progress, political and technological progress. All those things are kind of summed up in the Bobo kind of worldview, that there is progress, that there is a point in pursuing beauty for its own sake, being a flaneur, walking around and just enjoying life. But apparently, David Brooks just wrote this follow-up to his book, which appeared in the Atlantic magazine last year, saying that it was entitled Blame the Bobos, and saying that basically all the backlash, the reactionary oligarchic populist backlash we've seen in terms of Trump and Brexit and Putin himself has been basically because everybody hates the Bobos. So hate away, haters. This is a parade of pictures of bourgeois bohemian life. Actually, to be honest, I don't know if I'm really a Bobo, and if my existence here in Paris is Bobo. There are certain buzzwords like upcycling, which very much do define my life, because it's very much defined by second-hand clothes shopping, second-hand books. To that extent, I'm a bourgeois bohemian, with the emphasis on the bohemian part. In the 19th century, the bourgeois bohemian lifestyle was characterized by kind of slumming aristocrats who hung out with gypsies. So since my girlfriend's mother is partly from that community, from the Roma community, then I guess there is some element of the classic 19th century bohemianism. And of course it was Charles Baudelaire, as I never tire of repeating, who coined the phrase the flaneur and launched the idea of the flaneur, the kind of sensual aesthete who's just drifting around, enjoying life, because frankly there's nothing more important than living for today if we can't count on tomorrow. But in other ways I'm not a Bobo, I think, because I don't go to, for instance, organic grocery stores. I prefer ordinary supermarkets. And I think a lot of my style, for instance, we've been living through Paris Fashion Week in the last month, and a lot of my, while it was interesting to be hanging around those people who are sort of hysterically applauding the Valentino show, for instance, at the Caro where it was held, I'm not really part of that world at all. Fashion bloggers and things repel me somewhat, but I do like for instance, the unique the weekend market, which they held at a place called 3537 in Le Marais. That kind of does speak to me because it's, I guess it's ethical shopping or something. It's funny, we just stumbled across a whole new kind of trendy area near the Canal Saint-Martin, which is on the Rue de Marseille, and there are shops like Centre Commercial and Agnès Bay there, the best Agnès Bay branch, the most atmospheric in Paris. And that kind of, I don't know, I have mixed feelings when I'm in places like that. I kind of photograph the light fittings and the shop windows, but that's not really my lifestyle. But I think because I kind of cruise around in Repetto white Oxford shoes, Repetto ZZs like Serge Gainsbourg used to wear, I think people probably assume that I'm a Bobo. To me, a Bobo is someone with a shivering little dog on a string, a Chihuahua or a Pomeranian, preferably. And also bonsai children. It's a phrase I came up with in Berlin, because there are certain areas where you see these bonsai children. Bonsai in the sense that bonsai plants are stunted and dwarf-like. They're unable to grow beyond a certain level. And these kids always seem to be 3 years old. They're always at the most annoying age, running around screaming. And their parents, being Bobos, don't tend to discipline them. So, because permissiveness is part of their value system. You reason with your children, despite the fact that children are some of the least reasonable people in the world. So it's all part of the package, and I don't know if I really buy the whole package, but I buy parts of it, and I enjoy my times in Paris. I came from Berlin at the end of February, and I've been here all of March. The first half of March was like winter, still wearing winter coats and things. The second half of March was unseasonably hot, sunny, above 20 degrees every day, really much more like, early summer than late winter. So, and which is probably due to climate change and stuff. We also had a weird period when there was a whole lot of dust from Africa blowing in, the Saharan sands basically swirling up from North Africa to the whole of Europe. So there were these weird red sunsets and haze and kind of clouds, and it was very odd. And there's been terrible air as well. The presidential election, of course, is coming up very soon, and we have a divided right wing this time between a guy called Eric Zemmour and Marine Le Pen. So we're hoping that the division between those two right-wing candidates is going to stymie at least one of them, possibly reduce the vote for Le Pen, since she's the main contender from the right. But it is worrying that there's such a large percentage. These people are charting 20% of the voting intentions or whatever, which is pretty alarming. And really, Macron, people don't like Macron, but he's seen as the least worst option in the response to that challenge from the right. So with that as a backdrop, and the hated Bobo as a kind of scapegoat, because this Atlantic magazine article basically said that it's these are the people that everyone loves to hate because they seem super privileged and super white, despite or even because of their tolerant values and their kind of inclusiveness and their celebration of other cultures. Paris is still very much a city that does celebrate other cultures. We love going to the 13th arrondissement, for instance, and looking at the Vietnamese, Chinese kind of stuff down there. Going up to Belleville, there's a lot of African culture, amazing African clothes, which are very exciting and bring a whole new kind of range of colours and patterns. Or, Chateau Rouge area. There are all these little arcades and things like the Passage Choiseul or the Passage Brady. Passage Brady, mostly Indian, Asian groceries. So like all the best world cities, Paris is a microcosm of a lot of different places. Of course, as a result of the colonial experience the French had. But it's a very celebratory microcosm, I think. It seems very positive about the its ex-colonies and its world citizens. In a way that doesn't really happen so much in Berlin. I think Berlin is, you have some North Vietnamese in Berlin, you have some displaced parachuted creative class people. This is something that comes up in the, if you look at the idea of the bourgeois-bohemian in David Brooks' account, it actually ties in with Richard Florida's account of the so-called creative class. These are people, it's funny, the cafes in Paris seem to consist a lot of these people who are parachuted in from English-speaking countries in particular. The kind of Parisian cafe which, when I lived here before in the 90s, for instance, there were far fewer of these minimalist third-wave coffee-type cafes. And now when you go to these places like Partisan, they are entirely staffed by and customered by English-speaking people. There are other perhaps newer waves of cafes like Leipzig, the Leipzig opposite the Jewish Culture Museum in the Marais, for instance, which has just opened, run by Taiwanese who started by selling bubble pearl tea, boba, but tapioca tea, but have sort of now moved into regular coffees. Same thing with Place 82, which is a place we like going to, a South Korean place down near the Place Morge, and the Rue du Mouffetard. And so you see this sort of Asian move towards so-called third-wave coffee or whatever. And it's there are these things which are constants in Paris, like, the appreciation of coffee. The old cafes used to be theatrical and with the sort of basketwork chairs and the waiters and their aprons and their white shirts and things, I found them threatening somehow. I found them, high pressure, to drink your coffee and get out and vacate the table. Certainly no people with laptops there, which I suppose is a plus. One of our favorite of the new wave of coffees is called Cote Cafe, and it's up in Ménilmontant area, and it's run by a couple, one of whom is French, the sort of barista guy, who's a kind of cocky know-it-all barista, and his I guess, wife, who is South Korean. But they've created a very nice little ambience in a very independent little cafe. I guess a South Korean ambience. This is the weird thing. As I was talking, telling you last time, it's very much the case that the aspirational and the Asian have kind of blended in a way that maybe has not been seen since, well, certainly it was happening in the 90s. But maybe it hasn't been seen since the 1890s when there was Toulouse-Lautrec, and people were drawing inspiration from Japanese prints and from the exhibitions of Japanese art which were being shown in Paris in the late 19th century. I just found out something quite funny, which is that a friend of mine who used to contribute to Kahimi-Kari recording sessions in Paris when I lived here in the mid-90s, he's called Ariel Witzman, and he was a sort of television personality on Canal Plus, and he had a show on Radio Nova, and he was a very hedonistic guy who was into Asian culture and into analog synths and things. He's now bought the concession to Miniso, which is I guess it's a Chinese franchise of kind of novelty goods, which copies its logo from Uniqlo, and which is keen to expand through Europe. The weird thing is that when I was staying in Myanmar, in Yangon, in 2018, there was a branch of Miniso which was not at all the kind of shop you expected in, Burma, but it was like a weird connection. I found myself going there quite often as a place where you could, get cheap electronics and sort of gimmicky goods that would remind you of these more advanced and rich economies of Asia. But it seems to be part of, Ariel in the 90s, I knew him more as the editor of a computer magazine called Interactif. He'd written for Actuel magazine, which was something I used to read in the 80s a lot. In South Kensington, I'd go and buy, in the French newsagents at South Kensington, buy copies of Actuel, which was edited by this guy called Bizot. I think it was Jean-Emmanuel or Jean-Claude Bizot, who was a kind of visionary 1960s style, 68, a 68 art kind of publisher of ideas and style culture features in Actuel. So Bizot, I think, financed Interactif, which was a kind of short-lived but very stylish information magazine, a little bit inspired by Wired in the US, but I guess that was very important because in the 90s we were living through this kind of information revolution where it seemed very important to do things like learn Macromedia Director and we were oriented really to Silicon Valley, I guess. This all kind of culminated in me writing for the Wired website for a while. But Paris, I guess we now live in the post, what Nicholas Negroponte called the post-bit atom. He talked about the distinction between atoms and bits. And of course, in the 90s, it was all about transitioning from atoms to bits, from the real world to this artificial world, which seemed very exciting, the digital world. Now, of course, it's kind of gone the other way. Just as people like the Meta company who run Facebook and Instagram are trying to encourage us into a metaverse, inverted commas, we're those of us who think of ourselves as slightly ahead of that curve are reinvesting the real world, which we have to live in for God's sake. The world of flea markets and secondhand clothes, which actually smell of the previous occupant. All that seems kind of weirdly glamorous now. And that, I guess, is what characterizes the bohemian life in Paris at this moment. It's a lot of friperies and brocante markets and vide-grenier, as they say, the emptying of the cellar. I guess you could say in a wider cultural sense, we're emptying our cultural cellars. A lot of the exhibitions you're seeing are going to be archives, like the Prisonic exhibition at the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, which we just saw. Prisonic was a shop which existed in the 60s and, well, probably long before that as well, but it sort of culminated stylistically with the creative directorship of a guy called Mark Held, who was a visionary design kind of designer and design director. So this exhibition really talks about how Prisonic looked in the late 60s and the early 70s, the graphic design, the furniture, a lot of molded plastic furniture and stuff. So that all kind of floats my boat. And because partly I was brought up as a child, we went to Prisonic in Athens. There was actually a branch in Athens. This was French soft culture reaching other parts of the world. And this is now France celebrating its own vide-grenier, its own emptying of its past and its underground, its soft culture underbelly. Where I'm living, there's a flea market and a lot of old books on tables every day. Books which are very much the past of France and the soft cultural power of France on display on those tabletops. And when I was living in Osaka, I think I was starting to gravitate back to Europe in my last couple of years in Osaka. One of the things I did was I went downtown to Namba, where there was an old bookshop, now demolished, now closed down, old lady bookshop, she's probably dead, where I bought these old second-hand French paperbacks. Another old lady bookshop, which is sadly closed, is called the Librairie de l'Escalier, which was on the left bank. And I think just one old lady ran it, and it's now closed, and it seems she died. A lot of condolence messages on the door. She was there for, 50 years or something, I think, in this very... the exciting Paris, which would have greeted my mother, who came to be an au pair girl, actually, here in the late 50s, just before I was born, before she got married to my father. So I guess my francophilia really starts with my mother's time here in the 50s. So it's really the Paris of Françoise Sagan and Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir and all those people. The left bank Paris, the Beat Hotel. I guess my mother wouldn't have been so much into the Beats, the American writers who were hanging out here in Paris before they headed off to North Africa and started living in Tangier and stuff. Paris was the wild frontier. It's now much more tame, just as New York is much more tame. It's much more oriented to the rich, but it still has its ethnic underclasses and its kind of turbine-like churning of world styles and the styles of the past, and that's what I really respond to. I also respond, like all animals, I respond to the spring, so it's really delightful to be in Paris in the spring. It's not just a cliche, it is perennially delightful to be here at that time, to see the new flowers coming out in the trees in the Jardin des Plantes, to go and see the exhibitions at the Beaux-Arts, to see what people are up to as they come out of hibernation, because it's really been a 2-year hibernation as we deal with COVID. A lot of COVID still going around. I haven't personally been reinfected, but I guess it's much less serious than it used to be. So, yeah, we just have little things like global wars to deal with, and the apparently constant swing to the right, which is motivated by a large mass of people who feel left out by the system, which I'm kind of partly celebrating here, which is a system of affluence and optimism, wealth, and the pursuit of beauty. So I am aware that I'm living a very privileged life here, just being here and not having work to do here particularly. I've done my work, which is making my album, and now I just have to go off and be alive for the rest of the year. So it is a very privileged position, but, I think we're all just grasping whatever pleasures we can grasp. And these photographs are the record of the pleasures that I'm reaching out to and grasping here in Paris. It is a city which does allow you to do that. I don't know how I'd be surviving in other cities with other pleasures. I'm sure I'd come up with some. Maybe I'd have to look within a bit more than I do here. So that's really my diary, visual diary, and rambling spoken diary of my last month here in Paris. People complaining that I hadn't updated. Sometimes you don't know what to say when there are such large, looming, dark, disastrous things in the world as earthquakes, or, Japan had quite a major earthquake recently. But I'm not going to vlog about the news cycle. See ya.
Open University.
Thank you.